Yeah, you're good to go. Currently 0 viewers. Right,
On side government, we think it's an incredible atrocity. We think it's a tragedy. We think it's horrible that we have souvenirs of imperialism still being glorified, still being honored, still being watched in the Western world. We think it's a horrible remnant of a imperialist and colonialist history that we absolutely must remedy, that we must overcome, and we have to honor like the rights of and give back what has been plundered and stolen. Two things in my speech. First, I'm going to give you the principal justification why it's incredibly important to honor the right of these unique and the unique connection these artifacts and objects have to their historical and cultural conditions. Secondly, I'm going to explain the value of these objects, how countries have been deprived of economic benefits. Poor countries, they have been deprived of tourism, they have been deprived from a lot of things, but when these objects have been kept from them. Before so going into my first argument, we think that it's inherently wrong that objects have been plundered and stolen in a colonialist era. These objects are now in museums in the Western world being viewed and being seen, and we see them as souvenirs of imperialism. We think it's horrible that we in the West keep cultural ownership of objects we have no right to have in the beginning. Objects that have been plundered and stolen. We think it's inherently justice that we give these objects back. That it's a sign of retribution that we honor, that we should that we should do. For example, Nigeria has demanded that hundreds of great historical artifacts like bending bronze sculptures that was made in Nigeria in past hundreds of years to be given back, but the British Museum has denied them that right. Those are exactly the type of cases that we're talking about in this debate. We think that those should be given back. We think that Nigeria's claim to those objects, for example, is completely justified. Why? Because it has a unique connection to that place in the world. It is part of their historical and cultural origin. We believe it's time we honor that right. We believe that therefore these objects should be given back, because these objects have a great amount of value for people from these places. They don't have that value when you go into a British museum and watch them, or you're like in a Dutch or Swedish or whatever museum and go in and watch them. Then they become symbols and you see that you don't, as a Westerner, you're not as able to appreciate the value of these objects. Moreover, you deprive the opportunity. Clarification?
Yes. So think about products that have been taken.
Sorry, product.
Okay. What about things that are through commerce, has been exchanged, are from the past and are through artifacts? They're not from plunder. They also have to be returned on this knowledge base.
Commerce. We're not talking about commerce. We're talking about objects that has been stolen. We're talking about plunder. We're talking about objects that was obtained during colonialist times. Those are the type of things. If there's been a legitimate trade between two parties, that's not within the scope of this debate. Okay, so moreover, these people that live in these countries have a legitimate right to connect to their part of their history. No, thank you. They have a legitimate right to be interested in their culture of origin, as many people do. That's why we're interested in where we come from and who we are. We think they have that right too. Why in the status quo are they unable to go and see these objects? Because a lot of these people live in poor, non-developed, live in poor living standards, have poor living conditions. They're simply unable to travel and see these objects. We think it's deeply unfair on a principle level that you keep that from them. That is what we're changing with this policy. So going on to my second argument. Before that, yeah.
Okay, so do you think this applies to all intellectual property produced by people living in a country, like patents, books, movies, and stuff? Would you agree that the same kind of principle would apply? That we should
patents and intellectual goods are way different in their nature than physical objects. They're way different because they can be accessed throughout the world. Patents are in the analogy with those type of objects are flawed, and therefore your PR doesn't not really is relevant. Okay, going on to like what this has, like not only have they been deprived of the opportunity of seeing this object, we also say that they've been deprived of economic benefits of having these objects, because tourism for like cultural and historical tourism is a great source of revenue. We see how people from mainly the rich world travel to far extent to go to amazing historical sites, to go and see like the pyramids in Egypt, to see Angkor Wat in I think it's, I don't remember the country, but it's beautiful at least. I don't want to mispronounce it. Anyway, so we see how people go through a big extent in order to travel and see this. We think that when these objects are returned to the place of origin, that can be a great source of economic revenue. Economic revenue and benefits that are way more useful, that provide way more benefits in those types of more poor countries than they do in rich countries. We think that the revenue from selling museum tickets and so on are much more useful, like on a basically like utilitarian calculus, and come to a greater can be used. They have a larger impact in like places like Nigeria than in a British or Belgian or Swedish setting. We think that is, and then we think that that can be greatly beneficial to these areas. Lastly, we say that by overcoming historical injustice, by giving back these objects, that is a sign of good gesture. It's a good, a sign of good faith, right? And we believe that these type of objects are being used to fuel nationalism, to fuel spite and hatred between countries, and rightfully so. We think it's hard in many cases in international relations between countries to overcome past injustices. We think that of giving these back, we increase the likelihood of overcoming some things. We increase the likelihood for countries to overcome historical injustice. We think that this can potentially develop the relationship between these countries. We think that it creates relationships that are mutually beneficial to them. We think that is like a great potential of doing this. Therefore, for all this reason, because it is principally wrong to keep what you have stolen, because it is principally wrong to withhold objects that have great historical and cultural value from people. Therefore, I'm glad to. Oops.
I'd like to thank the Prime Minister for that speech and invite the Leader of the Opposition to open the case for opening opposition.
We believe that it's a horrible idea that museums in the West should take all these treasures that humanity has created over the centuries and start offering back to modern states that in a lot of cases have little to no connection to the original countries that they came from. We think that the way the government presents this case, they squirrel and they pick best cases for their sides. I'm going to show you where most of the impact in this debate lies, which is when you give art back to countries that shouldn't get it and they won't get many of the benefits of this art that we see today. I'm going to talk about two things. First of all, how we don't believe that these countries have an inherent right to this art can continue our partner started with our POI. And secondly, I'm going to talk about what possible function these artifacts can serve in the modern world and how that function is much better served when they're part of cultural institutions in stable countries, and that's where they should stay. We think that what the government does is politicizes these objects to a great extent, and that's not a really great thing to do. We do think there are cases where there's not much impact. For example, if the British Museum sent the Elgin marbles to Athens, we do think that they would be displayed quite nicely. We don't think that there's and people would be able to go to see them. Maybe less people would because less people go to Athens than to London. But we don't think that's where the the main brunt of this debate lies in just quickly on their economic benefits. First of all, it's unclear how big this economic burden caused by like this exact thing. We think colonialism has hurt them in a variety of ways, and like if you want to give them reparations for them to cause, we feel that's another debate. It's not obvious that giving them these objects back will give them that much money. It's not like ticket sales will generate that. Plus, these artifacts are often extremely expensive and difficult to exhibit, so it's not clear that a lot of these countries even could do that in a way which preserves them. I'll talk a lot more about that in my second point. Before that, let's talk about how they have no inherent right to this art. So basically, the government goes, let's give all this immensely valuable artifacts to states that exist on the land in which these were originally produced. In most cases, where an ancient civilization stood, right? We think that, you know, when you have a passage of hundreds or thousands of years and you know, have a completely different culture, speaking a different language, lots of generations have passed by, and often, you know, they have nowhere near the same borders that they once did. We don't really recognize that link is always. I mean, of course, the people in this country are going to say, you know, we are entitled to these very expensive things. You know, why wouldn't they say that if there's any chance that they're going to get it back? But within a lot of cases, those links are extremely tenuous. Furthermore, they say that, you know, anything from a colonial country that's exhibited in the British Museum is stolen. That's not so, right? The government wants to return lots of things that were legally obtained, often under even within a you know, legal transaction in, you know, a modern sense, often in conditions which we, by modern standards, would be a little spurious. However, we don't think we can, and we don't think we get any way to tell which is which from the government. We think that we think there's a huge gray area in here between what was stolen and what was obtained legally, and we get like nothing from the government to differentiate between those. Furthermore, the motion does say all, and they say only stolen things. I'm not sure exactly what kind of art they're returning and why and to whom. I hope the DPM has a lot more to say about this. And we think that even under the cases where it was like clearly stolen, we think that there's lots of good reasons they should be exhibited where they are exhibited now. Furthermore on this, we think it's very important to note that the producers of objects in many museums often have very difficult relationships with the states or the countries that you would now be giving the art to. Like people from minorities, especially religious minorities, often have a very troubled relationship with that state. So when you have something like the Han majority in China, which is traditionally you know, oppressed minorities and subcultures and anti-government movements, if you give the art of those movements to the current government, we think that they have they've shown that they're willing, and they have great incentives that when they get that art to either, you know, not display it or display it in a context which is false and lies and downplays the importance of those people, or, you know, afterwards just destroy that art. We can have very perverse incentives when you have these modern states which are not, you know, the actual creators of that art. Let's move on to my second point. Like, what do we expect to get from these artifacts in the modern world? We think that when these, in the status quo, when these artifacts are held by cultural institutions, we get 4 great things. First of all, we get exposure. We have like modern museums in cities which are visited by millions of people. These cities often tour these artifacts at great expense all around the world, so the maximum number of people can see them. People know where these where they are. They're relatively cheap to go and see them. So we have these objects that, like, we do believe belong to, like, common humanity, and have like link us all to our past and our history, there and available for everyone to see. We think that this happens a lot less on their side, where not every country is going to exhibit them, or they're going to be in places where different taxes go.
So how can you say that it's just that these have high exposure and very easy to go and see? For some people, yes, but not from the people that are lacking the economic funds to go there. Why would we think deprived of the right?
We think a lot more people who don't have economic means go to the National Museum in London than would fly to Nigeria to see the many bronzes. We think if you care about telling people about the history of Nigeria and having that culture exposed, you do it a lot more when they're in the National Museum than when they are in Nigeria. exposure was first. Next, conservation. We think lots of countries just don't have the resources or the interest to conserve these things. Third, on curation, we think this is kind of what I already talked about. These museums are great at presenting these items as part of a collection, as part of a story of humanity and having around the world. We also think that they're apolitical, right? We think that art should be separate from politics, especially this art, which we uniquely believe belongs to all of us. We think we lose that on the government side, where they exclusively politicize this art, sending it around the world. And it's just some reasons to oppose. Thank you.
I'd like to thank that speaker for their speech and invite the Deputy Prime Minister to continue the case for opening government.
So I'm going to take this in my speech. I'm going to talk to you about how this actually does have a connection to specific world when we do this as fair as possible in terms of where this object should belong and what the connection is, and how this is in fact a reminder of imperialism. Secondly, I'm going to talk to you about in terms of the tourism and all the points we get on low in terms of that, specifically how distance disconnects the object from its value in terms of the importance it has to anyone who actually view it, and then lastly, and in terms of cultural engagement, how culture is this important part and how it tells you about the nation's history. A couple of things to respond. So first of all, to the following information that we get from closing opposition, where they ask us in terms of objects that were traded. We think that even if we would have those believe that we should give those back as well. Often when it comes to these types of trades, they were happening under unfair circumstances, because at that point of time, they were often in a dependency shift where you already had a country invading, where you had a foreign dependency where you needed a large amount of money, so you were forced to give away that as to get that what you get from the return from the imperial. So we don't think those happen under fair circumstances even then, when you are supposed to say that it's free trade, because it's not actually free. The second thing in terms of funding this, because we get this very condescending narrative from the previous speaker in terms of all these countries can afford it, even though the only example is China, which is one of the largest economies in the world. But we said that even if these are poor countries, normally not only do you have international institutions who are more than happy to often fund these exhibitions, but you also often have things like private investors and organizations who are interested in keeping these exhibitions alive, because they spend their time being the word is safe, but they have an incentive, and because they have nothing else to do with their rich money, they decide to put it into funding these kinds of exhibitions. I think that conservation shouldn't be that much of a problem. We do have the funds to deal with that. Last piece of rebuttal, the idea that China will not give this movement. I think that it's not our purpose to give it possible. We think that when we give it to the country origin, obviously we want to give it as close to the original owners, in terms of group or whatever, as possible. But the specific is that the geographical location is the important factor we try to get it to, because it does tell us important significant history. So my first point is, we think that often when you have things like the British Museum retaining many articles from both Egypt, from Nigeria, from many places where they closed in Paris, this is a reminder of imperialism, where they have a petty way of retaining cultural ownership long after the British power has faded. And we think that this is something that reminds these nations every day of their oppression, especially when they keep on refusing, like Austria mentioned, the Nigerian government of getting their things back. When they refuse to give Egypt their things back. We think the same thing with Italy, when they refused to give Ethiopia back that Mussolini stole the Axiom obelisk during his time, and they're not still not getting it back. I think it is awful but it's also something that reminds us that you still have some form of power over them. And more importantly, that these countries where they are having these experiences keep on making money off those imperialist moves. It's even more awful that they keep on exploiting that. The fact that you don't get that economic opportunity to thrive in your same country. Right. Now, secondly, in terms of like disconnect, this is dealing with all the material in terms of like how this exposes people, how it gives them an insight. We're saying that these objects, as Osho explains to you, is far more valuable in the country of origin because it gives a connection to that place. It gives you a reason to engage with that place and further research because it's a point of interest where you have some geographical location to tell us you, oh, there's a relevance to why this is like being placed here. There's a relevance to why I'm going here to see it. It's not just like, oh, with the Egypt mummies and like a bunch of graves or something for some reason in the British Museum. Like that, the only thing that tells me in terms of why it's there is because the British people took it from Egypt, and that I think is really, really bad. Right. So the disconnect with distance leads to less exposure and less engagement in terms of getting that national identity. But this brings me to like the last idea in terms of culture, in terms of what it means and it's so much. Because like for many people, as to explain, like in modern countries, you might not have that much of a connection to the ground history, to your nation's history. And that is because of the fact that you are less exposed to it, because all the things that can be educating you yourself, that like special needs, like for example, like cities and equal measurements, are gone because colonials and horrible people stole them and took them and robbed them and things like that. Yeah, okay, fine, that was a bit clear, but yeah. Point being here is that this allows those citizens of that countries to critically engage with those grounds history, with this unique culture, with that national identity, and allows them to further understand how the nation is as it is today. That is a unique opportunity that they don't get otherwise because they can't access these otherwise they can't be exposed to them. They can't afford to go them. It's not just because they're in poor countries. It's just because like sometimes you're on a lower economic class and like there's little reason to like go travel across the sea to like pay a bunch of money just to see like a museum. It's just like an expensive to do when you don't have that connection from the beginning. Before I move on and finish this, I'll take
So given that like there's no country which has had all of its artifacts and all of its cultural things plundered, what is like the comparative like advantage that your site is offering?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Given that like most countries have a lot of their own cultural things within the country, only a small percentage of all things have been taken out. So what's this like comparative?
Because often the things taken are the most culturally significant. But often the things that are of value to take away from those countries are the ones that have meaning, that have a value. Like even then they have a big value. That's the ones that you want to take. Like beyond the ones that are too big to actually move away at that point in time. Right. But in terms of like how we think this is an horrible, offensive affront to these countries to continuously be reminded of the oppression of this being taken away from your country from the very beginning. But even if we can see in their best case scenario that there is like some like saying like leeway in terms of like who has rights ownership, we see that on our side of the house we at least have more legitimate ownership to it, while in the current status quo, the museum has no legitimate ownership to it because they didn't acquire it through legitimate means most of the time. Even when they did, that was under unfair circumstances. So it's even then like quite illegitimate. No, I think I'm done.
I'd like to thank the Deputy Prime Minister for that speech and invite the Deputy of the Opposition to conclude the case for the opposition.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm gonna like go through and mind about these 3 points again, which is like first of all that the national claims to art are problematic, so principal clash. Secondly, that art is currently held by cultural institutions, which are the best guardians of this art. And third of all, just talk about why the status quo protects like the function of artifacts in the modern world. So whether I want to do some like direct rebuttal, right? So on this point of overcoming historical injustice, like we don't really understand. Like we agree that okay, colonialism piercing is bad. However, we think that like the art taken or the arts like traded away in past injustice is a very small part of like the colonial injustice that has occurred, right? So we think like you can get like this small kind of like benefit, but like we don't agree that this is like the most important thing. We think that there's a lot of other things that can just be addressed like injustice, and we don't really see how this is going to improve relations between the countries, right? They just tell us that like, oh, this is going to like redress like past injustices, but it's unclear to me like what the mechanism is. Like, what is this going to open the door to? How is this actually going to change like the relationship between the states? Because we think like at the present moment, like, you know, past colonial like countries are actually like have a lot of like trade, cultural, etc. connections and flows to countries that were colonized. So we think even though there's this relationship of kind of like, you know, past grievances, we think that there aren't like, you know, huge roadblocks standing in the way due to this culture. So we don't see why this is like a huge like unique benefit that you get that's important that balances out the harms that we discussed. On this thing of names for home countries, regarding the like economic benefits, we don't think the benefits on like tourism are like significant enough. We think that first of all there's like most countries, as I pointed out, do hold a lot of their cultural heritage. It's not true that all the best things have been taken. Like this is just like blatant lie by like opening government, because in fact like most countries do have first of all like impressive like, you know, pieces of like, you know, architecture and sculpture etc., which are in fact able to be moved, but also like, you know, important paintings, jewelry, etc. You can't always like rank these things. There's a lot of different kinds of bodies that are in exhibition like everywhere, right? I also think many people can and do afford to travel to see art. So lots of people actually do travel to see like, you know, art as it is in the modern life. I think most countries, also the access to artifacts in these countries would likely accrue to those living in capitals and privileged positions anyway. So it's not like everybody's suddenly gonna be exposed to so much more art. We think like we can show art from many countries on tour. So like we think like this idea of like exposure to like greater cultural like connection, we just think like there is not enough comparative impact in this motion to achieve the benefits that you're trying to achieve, right? Whereas we tell you that there's a lot of reasons for not achieving, which I'm going to talk about now. National claims to art are problematic. So you said this is more legitimate ownership. We told you that nation states do not have claims to past civilizations. We told you that the modern state does not automatically inherit the right to own everything that has been produced within like the territory that it now controls, right? We tell you that we don't recognize that as a principal right, and you don't explain to us why that link necessarily exists. And I'm going to tell you about why it's problematic. But also telling you that producers often have mixed relations to the political situation of home country. Producers of art and important cultural heritage can often like use art as a form of expression that may be against kind of like the political or cultural climate in the country. So in fact, they oppose the state at the time when the art was created, and so it's not necessarily clear to me why the state has the right to that art. Additionally, like, you know, individuals have like autonomy and integrity. Like not everything you produce has like the state does not lay claim to everything you produce just because you come from that state, and we say that principle holds with art as well. Yeah.
The state has more rights. We say the people of that state has more rights through the natural and cultural history that they have a much more common.
Great. So the thing is, what I'm saying is you want to return it to the countries where it was produced. This means that the government motion operates by the national state boundaries. This means that the political agent who is responsible in the government motion is the nation state. This means that you as a government cannot take a stance where you try to decouple this motion from the nation state. This means your burden is to support that the national state is like the important actor, which is supposed to mediate this, right? And we say this motion thus creates unique harm by giving governments control and ownership of art objects, thus equating culture and state. So this is problematic. What I told you is that art is currently held not by countries but by cultural institutions. These are like large, you know, museums that have like, you know, boards of trustees. They have a lot of money. We told you there's 4 benefits to them. First of all, Balchi talked to you about exposure, right? Like these galleries have a lot of money to like expose people to the art. Secondly, we talked to you about conservation. For example, like I'm sure that like Assad would like to get a lot of like artifacts back into Syria, but there these artifacts would be under threat and they would likely to be destroyed. In a lot of other countries, we're not being dismissive of economic conditions. We're saying that in a lot of countries there is unstable political situation, or there's not sufficient like coordination within the art sector to properly protect these sectors. Just saying some philanthropists are going to come out of nowhere and fix the situation doesn't really rebut our point, because you specifically have to defend that like nation states are the ones that claim to the artifact. If they then pass it off to like a philanthropic organization that is run by like any country possible, then why don't you just say we should, but then like, okay, all art should be owned by strictly apolitical actors, which is the status quo. And that's what I talked about. No. So apolitical. These institutions are apolitical. They do not trust the government. That's why they do not want to return the bronzes to Nigeria, right? Because it is better when art is held by non-political actors who do not have to answer to the government. And we think like this is a really positive thing that happens in the West. Not only are these institutions located in democratic open societies, but they're specifically governed by people who do not have a connection to the government, and the government does not influence in the same way like what is on display and how much it can display of what. Okay, so what is like the function of artifacts in the modern world? This is like the last thing that from opening opposition we want to prove to you, that what we have is like this human heritage story, right? We have this high exposure of our shared heritage, this understanding of human history, this range of human achievement that comes when we display art of different cultures all together in one place. This comes from the ability of these cultural institutions to curate a comprehensive story that shows a narrative arc of our joint values, our joint development, which millions of people from many different countries, via tourism and travel with art, are exposed to over time. And this is how the artifacts function to keep us all together in the modern world and to keep us in touch with modern history, right? Whereas on government side, what you want to do is reinforce the national differences. You give the government undue control over the narrative. Walter already told you that this means that sometimes governments can choose to suppress some of the art that they receive or interpret it in a different way, which gives them the power to shape the discourse or the history of their country in a way that we agree that we argue can be problematic if they gain control over art produced by minorities or something, which we think is very likely under the government scenario, given that a lot of art has historically been produced in opposition to the leading groups, in opposition to the government. So we say this, that the government then gets up the opportunity to shape the narrative and shape the discourse over the history of their population in a specific way that we do not have under the status quo, because art is apolitical currently, and this is the thing that we in opening opposition fight to preserve. Claims to art are problematic and indefensible because we think cultural institutions are better for exposure, conservation, curation, because they're apolitical, and because we get this human story by displaying cultural artifacts from different cultures all together. Please close.
I'd like to hand it over to the opposition very much for that speech and invite the government member to open the case for closing government.
I don't think so. We'll find out, I guess. Mr. Speaker, please bear in mind that within the word offer, we're specifically talking about a moral imperative that museums ought to morally offer to give back these artifacts. That means that the main factor which we should be focusing on today is the principal grounds for which we should be doing this. Proud to continue the government case. Okay, so firstly, let's just get into two pieces of great rebuttal, right? So they kind of base their entire case on the fact that certain art pieces might be anti-government, might be destroyed. First of all, we tell you it is a minority of cases in which these artifacts are anti-government. Why is that? Because we think the vast majority of criticism of these governments will come from outside of the places, meaning that the origin from which they would have would be from people who are potentially exiled from this country later. Why is this? Because if we're talking about countries that are so desperate that they would be willing to destroy these artifacts, even though they'd be immensely popular, it's probably countries where you don't dare speak up within the first place. That's why we contest. That's why we specifically say that this is a minority of cases, and therefore not what we should be weighing importantly today. But even say that we do get back to the Syrian government or whatever. What we're saying is that when the Syrian government then decides to go in and say, okay, we're destroying these really valuable cultural pieces, we're creating huge focus. Right now, art against the Syrian government might not be the biggest story. Art against certain governments might not be the story. But that these governments now, when they are in other places in Syria, ought to be better, no thank you, now decide to go ahead and destroy them. That's the story, because that's when we begin to actively see that we're destroying the cultural value. It is not the art itself that is important, it is what it represents, the place we're now creating the story. Secondly, because let's just be clear, no museum, no thank you, would allow this big piece to go by unnoticed to be destroyed. Second thing, more exposure. Okay, first of all, we actually regret the fact that art as it is right now is centralized towards Louvre, Tate Modern, and MoMA. We regret the fact that this is everywhere. Art in and of itself and just seeing it is not necessarily just fantastic, just you seeing it. If we're going to go utilitarian, let's at least go middle. We think that the people who are going to value this art more, the people that live within the country, the people who personally identify with the art that we're specifically talking about, are the people who are going to feel more empowered, recognize this. We think by just per definition, spreading art more, we'll have more people being inspired by this art, we'll have more people, wanting to create art themselves. Putting all the big important pieces together doesn't necessarily mean that many people get exposure to it. We'd rather see this spread. More about this within my speech. Okay, firstly, let's talk about the moral imperative, and let's totally steal the principal point from opening government. Okay, 3 reasons. First of all, we contest the idea that these cultural artifacts should even allowed to be sold in the first place. We think that even if these museums are private entities, then this art represents a cultural identity which we should not be allowed to place a monetary value upon, because this should be belonging to the citizens, because this is your identity. This is where you stem from. This is where you begin to end. No, thank you. We think it is absolutely crucial that you as a citizen have access to the cultural identity which you belong. We don't think it is okay for someone else to say, you know what, everything within your history should just be allowed to be given away. Secondly, we think that there's also, of course we think that if this art was just taken through oppression, that's pretty bad. But even if it was bought, we think this is also bad, because say that Jonas, no thank you, was absolutely starving, right? He allows me to buy his, engagement. We think I'm still then morally impaired to offer to give it back to him later, because we think that me paying him when he is starving equates to coercion, meaning technically stolen despite the fact that this is something that was potentially paid for. Lastly, okay, we think that art, no thank you, is not only because we just take it out, but because art in itself also belongs to the culture, because that is what inspired it. Meaning the culture which created this art should also be the one that then has to write no thank you to own it. Yes, I will actually take a PY from closing.
Let me ask you a question. Something gains value in virtue of what? Is it just because it is from the past that makes it valuable? What about the context?
Okay, we think that these cultural pieces are probably going to be really important ones. Let me get into that exactly now. We think that the places which we're talking about is probably going to be places that had crisis, economic crisis, civil war crisis, countries through colonialism. We think the value that we're talking about with these art pieces is particularly important here because it is a part of a national identity. We think that the pieces here has more value here because they belong to the nation. I can personally, no thank you, identify with it since I was from here. But secondly, because it actually allows me, to get a bit of back on my understanding of my own nationalism. We think that art pieces to someone in Afghanistan that shows how Afghanistan used to be before it was the torn between countries it is today is going to be inherently more valuable than to me as a day just watching it in the museum. We think it is this because I went in Afghanistan will recognize that my country could once again become this fight. I will begin to recognize the fact that my country is not just completely destroyed. No thank you. I will begin to go ahead and actually recognize the fact that my country used to be great, that I have something to be proud of from stealing from the country. We think that is where the inherent value comes. Because I will look at it, I will recognize it more, I will view it more, and I'll identify with it. Secondly, we also think that when you centralize art, we think you basically just go through every picture in the museum. You might look at every one of them clearly. I think citizens can associate that generally do. Why is this identity crisis pretty damn important? Firstly, because just by the offering, we are literally telling you we recognize that something was done wrong when this art was taken from you, either economic coercion or just stolen. That means that already right now, there's some sort of pride in saying, yes, we're finally getting recognition from the evil West, recognizing that they did something wrong. That pride is already something that you can then take and be proud of. But secondly, we think that this is actually, a beginning for you to begin to piece together your nationality. I gave you the actions in which the countries that we're specifically talking about. We think these are the countries where most art was taken. We think these are the countries that most need something to rely to so they can begin to build up this nationality later on. Why is it art specifically important to do so? Because when I begin to see, okay, this is how the country used to be, oh, this is something to be proud of. Take the case of Egypt. There's so many artifacts which are crucial to me as an Egyptian because all I see right now is the consequences of the Arab Spring and how hateful everything turned towards now. We think that people in these situations, especially need to be able to look at art as a ways to which we can begin to express what our country could be. That is what this art is telling you. Our country used to be great. Our country can go ahead and be great again. What we will see happening is a bigger exposure of this art, which will inherently lead to more creation of art for these people because we recognize it is a means of expressing our country to show what our country is about. It's a way for us to communicate towards others. This is what it is. But secondly, because art in and of itself provides this national pride. It is our national heritage. Mr. Speaker, in the end, I simply do not understand on a principle level why I, just because I happen to be born in a country rich enough to somehow have either stolen or taken or prized some artifact from Afghanistan, has more right to see this national piece of heritage than the Afghans living there. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the government member for that speech and invite the opposition member to open the case for closing opposition.
My primary problem with the government case is that there's been an anachronistic imposition of different concepts such as moral imperatives, private property and ownership in terms of to whom something belongs. And the primary concept is that because something used to belong to a certain region or was a certain place, sometime past in history, that is something that has to be returned to that country because they have some sort of moral imperative to return to that country. First of all, that has not been established in any ways whatsoever, according to which principle this makes sense. Think about all these objects that they acquired in Syria, Persia, and whatnot. These projects, these artifacts were probably stolen from other areas as well. So first of all, on a whole practical level, it doesn't quite make sense, or it's very difficult to resolve the issues about who belongs, to whom does it belong, from whom has it been transferred to other groups of parties. So in that sense, on a practical level, we don't even know who to give it back to, right? So this is more the standard rebuttal about that what they're touting as something that's fundamentally true, it doesn't seem to be like it is true. It's just something that you appeal to with some modern concept about deontology and sort of moral implications. So what we have to do in this video is to recontextualize the very purpose of A, history, 2, museums, and 3, the value of artifacts in the first place. That is, the way in which they gain values in the first place. So my first argument is about how do historical objects acquire historical worth and significance, and that is from the way in which the artifact is integrated with the shared historical past between the country in which the museum is positioned and the country of origin. The second argument, which I believe is a corollary, is that how returning historical artifact as a form of retribution or as a sign of equality actually trivializes colonization and has far greater backlashes, because that once you take these objects out of these contexts within the museums, actually it does not confer the same value. So what they perceive as a sign and a piece of national identity and pride is actually giving a sign of humiliation, because it is something in which the past losses and the past plundering and pillaging, that historical memory is embedded within these objects. So concerning the first argument, right? So we say not everything that is from the past is something that has value in and of itself. Not everything we find from the ground and we put into the museum. And that is why we have to look at a more nuanced case of what things we actually put in museums and in which way are they acquired, right? So sometimes we have different warfares between different countries, USSR and the US, and we see different scraps medals during warfare where we maybe destroy someone's tanks or ships or something like that. We see also in South Korea where the American ships were attacked because they tried to spy upon the North Koreans, and now they displayed the ship as a sign of the mutual shared embedded historical shared embedded history of these two countries and their relationship to each other. So the very reason it acquires its value is because it is integrated in this intersection between country A and B. It is not because something from the past has an objective value in the sense that it can be displayed in the museum. And that is a fundamental problem what they're suggesting. They're suggesting that whatever came from the past, from a certain country, has the same value to these people in the same way that it has value within the museum, which serves a definite purpose. And what is that particular purpose? We say the museum essentially constitutes a historical platform and site where we remember our shared history with these countries, right? So whether, if we take it by the best case, that it is taken through diplomatic measures, through coercive measures, or through parasitic ties, it's actually valuable because it displays the relationship between these countries, and it is embedded within these objects this historical memory of their interdependent relationships, right? For the similar reasons when we erect different historical artifacts with respect to the Holocaust, other kinds of genocide, the very fact that we put it in Germany somewhere to recognize and to commemorate it does not have the same value as if we put it into some other places, such as we put it in the concentration camp, or if we put it in Poland and other places. Its very value is from the context in which it is embedded. So when these visitors, they come as British people, maybe watching from colonial powers of the past of Egyptian products or artifacts, it shows our interdependency. It shows our parasitic use. And that also makes us, it reminds us that we need to recognize our shared history and the past mistakes we made. Right? So that is the value of these artifacts. So once we put it back into their national context, what happens is not that it suddenly gains the same value and we all feel proud about it. That's why I'm going to address it in my second argument. Right? Before I move on, closing.
So comparatively, having Egyptian artifacts in a London museum where it's being watched by primary school kids and random tourists, instead of having it in its original state of nature where it belongs in its original historical context.
So first of all, we contested this whole idea about some original primordial state in which it was positioned in some country. First of all, that you have never proved. I said that's not something that's intelligible because things move out throughout history. They're plundered from somewhere else. To whom does it belong? But second of all, we don't see why there's an intrinsic value of putting it back there, because what I've been trying to argue throughout this whole debate, that the value differs depending on the context in which it is embedded. And I have a scrap of metal that has been collected from the Second World War when we had a war. That value it has within that museum, because it signifies what has happened between our countries, does not have the same value when we display it in the other country. And that leads to the second argument. How returning historical artifact is contrary to what they argue in their case as a sign of retribution, as sort of feeling apology, is something that creates more indignation and is a sign of humiliation, right? So just basically, just take an analogy. Someone goes into your house, he steals your stuff, he runs away with it. He comes back 100 years or next year with the item, having used it, it's depreciated a little bit, he gives it back, sorry, and that's it. And they are trying to suggest that him doing this very action is feeling very regrettable as they're doing a good thing. What we argue is that this is an act of humiliation, and the very value it now has is far different, because the value now within this context is entirely different. So no more POIs. So what I'm trying to say is that they assume that when we give them back, the country will perceive this as a sign of national identity. No. What we say is that it's going to be a direct affront to these cultures, as it is a sign of humiliation, plunder, and pillaging. That from the losses in the past, we experience that they have undergone all these trials and tribulations where people have been killed, but for them, receiving these goods from the oppressors might actually not have the same value. It is actually something that is going to inflict harm. So the whole case premise of the idea that this is going to establish rapprochement and cordial relationship between countries actually has the quite contrary effects. It's indignating. It is not as they claim that these objects have objective value. These historical artifacts have their values because of the shared intersection between these countries. And it confers value upon these museums because these museums are these sites through which we display a shared relationship with them. For these reasons, I beg you to
I'd like to thank the government member, the opposition member rather, for that speech, and invite the government member to make the case for the opposition bench. Currently 3 viewers. How exciting. Hello at home. Hope you're having a great time.
Okay, that's a lot.
Hey mom, if you're watching.
I'd like to thank my parents.
Sort of crumbs.
Let me know when you're done distributing.
Yeah.
I will give you the benefit of the doubt.
Okay, let's crack on.
Okay. Once again, this debate is about the offer in and of itself. What that means is it's not necessarily about the direct practical reasons for it. It's only about the practical reasons insofar as that provides a moral imperative. I will be flagging when I provide these links along the way, but that's where we, specifically as closing government, has given you an extension that wins this debate today, right? So moving into some things. Firstly, two clashes in this debate. Firstly, talking about, basically it's all like reasons for why they should be offering this thing, right? Firstly, the principal reasons. Secondly, the practical reasons, right? Firstly, principal reasons. What have we heard from opening half, right? Firstly, we hear opening government talking about how it's stolen through oppression and how that means that they have a moral imperative to give it back. Generally, we agree. Side opposition, firstly, doesn't give a response to this principal idea, but secondly, then they talk about how they say two ideas: no real link to the old culture, and secondly, they talk about how they have no claim to their old culture, right? Problematic in two ways. Firstly, culture is important is linked to the new culture because it has value. The fact that you can look back and take pride in that and use that in order to move your nation forward, which we'll explain in terms of practical parts later on, means that it has inherent value. So the fact that you don't have claim to old culture, first of all, then who the fuck else has claim to your culture, right? To the old culture and the history of your nation. But secondly, we think that you do have claim because it's where you came from. It's what shaped your country into what it is today, right? From closing opposition, they just say, they give us this principal reason that nothing belongs anywhere, that nothing has a home, an actual home, right? Okay, fair, on a very high philosophical level, maybe things don't belong anywhere, but in a practical world, in a world where things have come from somewhere, and where things happen because it's a consequence of something else, yes, they do belong, they do have a place that deserves it more than others. Why so? Because specifically art comes from a culture and comes from a national identity, is made from that thing and from that nation's history, because of those reasons, the art belongs to that country. Belongs more to that country than anywhere else, at the very least, if we find that belonging is not a thing that we can accept, right? All right, so principal reasons, basically what we then told you on closing government, later. Basically what we tell you is, first of all, it belongs to the people of the country because of their heritage. Secondly, we tell you that it's, even though it's bought in fair commerce seasons, we think that it's still stolen because it was bought through, what's it called, coercion, right? Because they were forced to do so. We think that regardless, they have they have a moral imperative to give it back to those who can not, because of that moral imperative. That is the principal reason. The practical reasons I'll explain to you now. Moving into my second class, right? So, sure, go ahead.
But we gave you the principal argument that it's important for art to be apolitical and to be dissociated from nation states.
Okay, yeah, that's true. Apolitical argument doesn't really matter in this debate because we're not politicizing it. Ladies and gentlemen, we're just saying that hypothetically, we think that it's more right for a museum to offer their art back to the original country. We're not having some government force them to do so. We're not forcing them to give it to some specific entity, to give it to Assad. There's just an incentive or an imperative for them to give it back, to offer it back, not give it back. All right, moving into the practical clash, talking about the practical implications. Firstly, why are the practical reasons important for this debate? Because of the fact that the history and art of a nation derives value from them being able to remember what once was, and that sometimes can be able to give that can sometimes give value, and specifically very big amounts of value to a certain country, right? Specifically in times of crisis. We see many countries, specifically in the West, had what we call golden ages, right? Where we look back upon our old culture, took pride in that in order to move on and develop, to gather as a nation, to unify and work together in order to create growth and all these kinds of things. That pride shall not be underestimated, as much as it is sort of a fluffy concept, right? So, going through the clash, what does opening half talk about? Opening government talks about tourism and relations between offer and taker, right? We think that generally tourism is, as much as it is important, we think that the actual value, what we bring to you, the actual value is in the story that the art brings back to it. The story that we once were a great nation, that we once were able to work together, or whatever it is in the certain context of the nation, right? Therefore, we think that that's much more important than tourism. What opening opposition talks about is things such as often by minority. Claire's already dealt with this. They also talk about more exposure and that they're just better at having them, right? Two problems. Firstly, little to no, like an art piece, as I alluded to in a PY, has little to no value in a London museum, only viewed upon by primary school kids who doesn't want to be there, or random tourists who are just walking by. Firstly, because that museum has culture and art from so many nations at the same time, right? So you're basically just passing by amazing Egyptian heritage, moving into Viking heritage or whatever, right? Because it's in that context of being in a mix of so many different cultures, it has little to no value. Right, moving into what we talked about. We talk about national identity and how that derives from art specifically. What Clara tells you is that the past value of it can be transferred into the present, right? So the fact that art was made in an era of great times, specifically the great pieces of art, will have been made in times of greatness, right? The great pieces of art from Egypt were made from the great eras of where they had all the great pharaohs and they made great pyramids and all those kinds of things. No, thank you. The reason why the pyramids and these pieces of art are so important to them is because it showed them what they as a people could do. As much as it is a silly reason, because they're definitely not the same people and they're hundreds of years apart, it still works, right? The reason why it works for a nation to look at that old culture and use it in the context of the world, because it gives hope. People have a tendency to lend themselves to hope in whatever form it takes, right? People believe in some magical guy sitting in the sky controlling everything. People believe in God just to get hope. Why wouldn't they believe in the fact that we once were able to do it, we can do it again, right? We think that that context is very important and can do much for this world, right? We think that national pride can provide to like many things. First of all, we think that it just provides less confrontation, right? If you're unified as a country, we think that you're less likely to just say, all right, screw it, let's just go and shoot at each other and like say fuck it all. We think that it's more likely that they would then, comparatively at least, more likely when they have their national pride to be able to go for a unified approach to solve things. Why is that very important? Because a lot of these countries that they're coming from, as Clara mentioned, are countries in which they have just gone through civil war or where they've just had economic crisis. This is specifically the time where they need to be unified. That's the specific value. That's what we brought you on closing government. That's why I'm so proud to propose. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the government whip for that speech and invite the opposition whip to make the case for the opposition bench.
Yeah, I do.
You noticed it.
Got it.
I know, I do advance info.
I rarely remember the claps.
You see, returning back now doesn't help.
It was more than
Look how smiling she is.
It's proof.
Dear Honourable Panel, this is what we at Closing Opposition stand for. First, we believe that the value that everyone has been talking about is highly misguided, because the value of these artifacts is the value gained through the shared history between the two countries, and this is why it is important for those artifacts to remain in the countries that they are now instead of being returned to the countries of origin. And I'll go on more about it later in our explaining of the clashes. The second thing that is the most important and that clashes directly with OG's case is that when OG says that this is a glorification of imperialism and returning these items is a sign of retribution, we say this is a major problem for the countries that get the items back because of two things. Firstly, it trivializes retribution, right? You say, oh, now we give this back to you, so all the things that we did in the past, it's okay. That is what they are saying, right? And the second thing is that Alex has also told you that when I get it back as the country, when I'm the receiving country, instead of feeling a sign of nationalism, which both badges are trying to say, what I actually get is I feel major embarrassment because I feel like this is an act of humiliation. Now you're giving me scraps of medals that we lost in the war, and then giving back to you and say that, hey, this is what we used to destroy you. And how is that a sign of national identity? We say this is bad for both countries. No, thank you. So what are the main clashes that have gone on to this debate, right? Firstly, everyone talks about the value of these items, right? OG talks about the economic value, which OO has already dealt with, and already said that these economic benefits don't really exist, right? Like, let me just kill it once and for all, right? When I go to London, there's a variety of reasons I go there, and most of it is to understand British culture, right? I don't go there to see the artifact that they loot from another country. That was maybe part of my visit that I saw briefly, but not exactly the whole reason I go there for, right? So this economic benefit just doesn't stand. No, thank you. Then the second thing they talk about, right, is mostly identity, right? So the entire Gulf branch, both opening half and the closing half, what they believe is that this is so valuable, that opening believes that this is so valuable that it can be used as retribution, right? We say that is a big problem, right? Because it trivializes retribution. That we say that this is not enough as a form of retribution, and by doing this, it actually allowed like the colonial masters to take advantage of this situation and say that, oh, this is all you want for retribution. Okay, we give it back to you, and now are we settled once and for all? We say it is harmful to the country, and the second thing is it is harmful to the country due to the insult they feel when they get those scrap of metals of defeat back, right? No, thank you. So then the next thing they talk about, right, what closing tried to extend briefly on this identity issue was that, you know, they say that they need these items to rebuild the identity, right? But firstly, let's look at the facts, right? The items that we're talking about is like centuries old, right? So these countries do not need these items to rebuild the narrative, right? What happens is that they already rebuilt that narrative long ago, right? Those countries, as we already pointed out in opposition bench, they don't even share that. We don't even know who to return it to, because they have moved past that, right? They are no longer this country, like, you know, what is General Persia in the past. They are now a different country, and they rebuilt their narrative on their own long ago. So closing government's case just doesn't stand, because giving me an artifact like century old, that does just bring me back bad memories of insults and something that I can no longer identify because I've already moved past that identity, right? Okay, I'll take over.
Right, so you say this is like a point of humiliation, but if it's so humiliating, these countries wouldn't request to have them back. It seems kind of like a wash.
Yeah, oh no, but the whole case that you say is all about the intent. It's the intent. Your entire case is built on the intent and you want to give it back to them, right? So the fact that when I say I want to give it back to you, I am really insulting you, whether I choose to accept it or not. As a country, I already feel the insult, and what you just continue is, no, thank you. So it's just going against what you're trying to build the case it is about, right? So what are the things that we really want to talk about, right? We say that if you look at OG case, right, the fact about retribution, we say that it is a big problem and it harms the very people that you're trying to save, right? We say the main problem that we have here is that when you trivialize, trivialize this whole the mystics of the past, right? Then they tell you this major thing. So when they tell you at both at government both branches, right, is that these things have values and then they need to be in the countries because the citizens of the state need to be exposed, right? We say on the contrary, that is the wrong place to be placed, right? Why is this? Because Alex told you that these things are valuable due to the display of the shared history, and it also shows us the interdependency. No, thank you. And this is important because he also adds that this is a way of showing how we need to recognize our past mistakes, right? This is why we show all these artifacts in London, and why is it important for those random kids that Jonas Trump talks about, right? Firstly, it's not just random kids walking around the museums, right? It's usually coupled with educational tours. Usually when you look at the item, they tell you that why this item is significant, and this is the history that we share, and this is the things that we have done in the past that we don't really want to repeat, right? You don't just say this is a statue of the Holocaust. You say this is something that we don't want to repeat, that's why it is here, and this is the thing that we want to get, we want to remind ourselves that we should never repeat those mistakes, right? And in this context, this is why it's important for it to be in London, for the school kids who are going to school there to know that this is the mistakes that we made in the past, and this is something that we should not make the same mistakes again. Then, and as I already mentioned, giving back to the country already has two major problems, right? If you talk about closing Gov's case about how they want to rebuild a new identity, we said they rebuilt the new identity long ago. That is why we at opposition don't even know who to return this to, because these items no longer belong to them. So so the entire case kind of falls, right? And then the second thing that we want to talk about is that the main issue is trivialization, which also integrates with the identity case, right? So the main thing is that when I receive this item back, right, what I feel is not what they are hoping for, like a research of national pride, right? Of that this is a civilization we used to belong to, right? Because basically it's no longer civilizations, it's countries that we're talking about, right? These countries has a different kind of history in the past, like centuries, and something that they don't really identify to. And also, if you give it back to me, you're just showing me that, oh, it is totally fine. Everything that you did to us in the past, now we are saying sorry to you with this vest and just have it back, and that is totally fine. So we say that what we at CO stands for the shared value of history, and why it's important for it to be in the country that it's currently in instead of the country of origin. And the second issue of the major issue of trivialization of the items, if it's a sign of retribution, and this is why we said this is so important for CO to take it. Thank you.
I'd like to have the opposition whip speaker and all speakers for a really excellent debate. If you could pop outside, shake their hands, we'll be back with you in no more than 15 minutes.